Hello, my name is Abdiel Vázquez. This is Maestro in Tune, and it's a pleasure to be here with you again. And this time I'm in the beautiful city of Williamsburg, Virginia. I am here for the next couple of weeks in the middle of a production of Lucia di Lammermoor, opera by Donizetti, and I will be the conductor for 3 shows with an amazing cast. So I'm on the road right now, and I've been thinking, as usual, about a lot of things. This time I get to work as a conductor in this production, and it gets me always to think a lot about the role of a conductor, because it's one of those big mysteries of life in the music world and outside of the music world. And I will explain what I mean by this. By the way, what you were hearing at the beginning, it's Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. That's the second movement, and it's myself conducting, and it's La Súper, this wonderful orchestra of which I'm the artistic director in my hometown of Monterrey, Mexico. And when we talk about what I do as a conductor, there's so many things that have nothing to do with the music that with my teacher, my conducting teacher, Maestro Enrique Dimeque, wonderful conductor and person, and I think I can also call him my friend. And as you know, as you may have already seen, I'm very proud of my teachers. I'm very proud to call them my teachers, and I always talk about them. And in his case, we have a running joke, because when he was starting his own career, he came back to Mexico after studying abroad, and he was named artistic director of 1 or 2 organizations in orchestras. And then he runs into all these things that conductors have to deal with. And he comes to his own teacher at that time, and his teacher patiently listens to him, and then he says, Charles Brook was his name, with his very thick German accent, but you wanted to be a conductor, meaning this is what you wanted, now you have to put up with it, and all the things you thought it was just standing in the podium and looking pretty and, you know, feeling the music and all of that, and it's way more than that. And this question comes up often about what conductors do, and I'm talking about when I introduce myself as a conductor with, you know, new friends or people who have nothing to do with music, and it's a fun topic of conversation, because naturally anyone who has been to a classical music concert, and if you have gotten to see a conductor or many conductors over your lifetime, or in videos or anywhere, you may have noticed that they all look very different from each other. And sometimes you cannot even tell exactly what they're doing at the podium. Sometimes with some conductors you can follow them. If you're not a musician, or even if you're a musician, you understand sort of what they're doing. With others, you don't understand fully what they're doing, and sometimes it's even a mystery, especially for musicians watching, if you don't understand what the conductor is doing and then the orchestras seem to understand the conductor. It's just so mysterious. And for non-musicians, the obvious question always is, well, the musicians have the music in front of them in the orchestra, so why do they even need the conductor? And of course, there's quick answers to all of this, and some of the answers are very evident once you give it some thought. Naturally, the conductor is there to mark the beat, the tempo, and this is absolutely necessary. If you've ever even tried to sing Happy Birthday with a group of more than 3 or 4 people, even 2, it's pretty much impossible to start all together unless one enterprising soul decides to count 1, 2, 3 right before. And even then, when you get to the middle of the song and you have to say the name of the birthday person, it becomes a big pandemonium, and then you have to then start again, like the ending of the song, and by then it's like everyone is singing on their own. And let's not even talk about cutting off the ending together. So very quickly you realize a necessity for someone to keep the beat if you want musicians to all sing together or play together. Rock bands famously start with this 1, 2, 3, 4, and they shamelessly do it, even though this is not even part of the song, right? And in their case, you're talking about music that's 4 minutes long with the same beat throughout. Now just imagine a full symphony that's 40 to 45 minutes, and it has all these swaying tempo changes throughout the whole piece, slower and faster and everything in between. So clearly you need someone at the front leading the musicians on what's the beat that everyone should follow. And it just follows that if there's already a conductor at the front, they might as well guide them in other things and not just be a metronome in front of everyone, meaning not just marking the beat, but maybe marking the beat with some expression that's related to the music. And if the conductor is already there and they have the full score in front of them, they might as well give some cues to musicians, because even though the musicians have the music in front of them, still they're not necessarily playing all the time. Think about the cymbals at the very end in the percussion section, that they have to count pages and pages of silence to finally come in. They could use some help from the conductor, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of evident what a conductor does. If you want to go maybe a little deeper on the magic of what they do, sometimes I use the example of a movie director, because a movie director works with the script, and everybody has the script too, but at the end the movie director brings their vision of the script to life, and for that they have the actors, but also the costume designers and the set designers and the lighting and the sound, and all of those elements need to be brought together with a single unified vision, with a single unified interpretation. And maybe, yes, it's a collaboration amongst all these parts, but somebody has to put it all together and package it and deliver it, in this case, to the audience, to the moviegoers. And in the case of the music director, you have the score, which is the equivalent of your libretto, what the composer wrote, and you have the musicians, all these different instruments at your disposition, so that you can unify your vision and try to deliver it successfully to the audience. I think it's a good metaphor, but it is a metaphor nevertheless. It doesn't, from my point of view, fully explain why is there such a big lore around conductors. And this might not be the obvious case for everyone, especially for people outside of music, but you may notice how there is a certain mystery about the conductor. They at least seem to have a lot of authority, and there's this whole idea about you need to call them maestro, and there's this like reverence towards them, at least outwardly. If you go a little bit inside the music world, you will realize that one of the favorite pastimes of musicians is to tell musician jokes. And yes, famously, the butt of the joke is usually the viola players or sometimes the percussion players, but very often it is the conductors. And the conductors are a punchline of tons of jokes. I will tell you some of my favorites. If you're walking on the street and you happen to run into all these conductors that are up to their necks in concrete, asking for help, what do? Well, naturally, you add more concrete. If you have a viola player who's not very good, what do you do with them? Well, you give them 2 sticks and you send them to the back, to the percussion section. And if they're not very good in percussions, what do? Well, you take 1 stick out of them, you send them to the front, you make them a conductor. What else? If you're in your car and you see a conductor on one side and a viola player on the other side, who do you run over first? Well, naturally, the conductor, because business comes before pleasure. You see, the jokes can get very unkind and maybe even cruel at some point, even if they are reasonably funny. One of my favorite ones is about the parrots. There's this one person, this customer, who enters a parrot store, and he inquires, what's the newest, what's the latest, and this store owner is like, well, we have this beautiful colors of feathered parrot who can sing every single Mozart opera. wow, that's impressive. How much is, well, it's an expensive parrot. It's $20,000. Like, well, the parrot can sing all Mozart operas. I respect that. What about that one over there? Oh, that one is $50,000. What? Why is that? Well, that one can sing all the Wagner operas in perfect German. He plays all the characters, different voices, including the ring cycle. Wow, this is insane. Well, naturally, this is a very expensive parrot. And just out of curiosity, what about that one over there? He points at a parrot that's at the back that looks like very old and decrepit. You know, the feathers are falling, it looks so wrinkly, barely, you don't know if it's half dead, half alive. And the owner is like, well, that one is special. That one is $500,000. And the guy says, wait, what? Why? And he's like, well, I don't really know what the parrot does, but the other two parrots call him maestro. And the punchline of the joke is that nobody really knows what the parrot does, what the maestro does. But the sensitive listener may say, well, maybe we cannot tell what the parrot maestro does, but maybe the other two parrots can tell, and that's why they treat him with so much respect. We don't know what was their relationship. Maybe he was their teacher. Maybe he is the one who taught them to sing all of these things. Who knows? But that is the main thing. So on the one hand, you have these musician jokes that very much diminish the role of the conductor. And it usually doesn't help to clarify this mystery if, in the other end, conductors love to aggrandize their roles. They can see themselves as the saviors of humanity. And don't take my word for it. Leonard Bernstein was right there with his orchestra playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony when the Berlin Wall fell. And Herbert von Karajan famously arrived to his recording sessions in his private helicopter, and he moved around from orchestra to orchestra in his private jet, and he had this collection of Lamborghinis. Most recently, Riccardo Muti, one of the greatest conductors alive, when he was accepting an award, he started his speech very funnily, very self-deprecatingly, saying how it's so easy to conduct and how he was teaching a janitor in the theater how to conduct, and all you have to do is go down for the downbeat, for the first beat of the bar, then go left for the second beat, right for the third beat, and up for the fourth beat, and there you have the pattern 1, 2, 3, 4. See, anybody can conduct, and everybody's laughing about how simple this is. But from there, he does an impressive jump, and these are not my words, these are his words, when he goes to say that actually conducting is the most difficult job in the world, because basically, more or less words, you have to absorb the message of the composer from the score, transmit it with your body, with your gestures to the musicians, and then from the musicians it has to go to the audience and reach their hearts and souls. So you're like this conduit from the composer to the hearts of each audience member. And sure, this must be a very difficult task, and there's a lot of magic, it seems, involved, but it may be a step too far to say this is the most difficult job in the world, especially if you compare that to heart surgeons or even a civil engineer who has to build a bridge for cars and trucks to pass through every single day for decades. So what is it about that conductors love to aggrandize their roles, musicians love to minimize their role, and everyone in between does not really know what the conductor actually do? So I already talked a little bit about what they do musically when they're in front of the musicians at the podium. But in this episode, I would like to delve a little further on all the different tasks that are expected from a conductor, and why then, because of all these roles that they perform, their roles may seem a bit, aggrandized in comparison with the orchestra, or with everything that goes around an orchestra. And in order to talk about all these roles, I will divide their functions in basically 3 stages. And those stages are that of when a conductor is a guest conductor, the second, when a conductor is the artistic director of an organization or a music director of an orchestra. And the third one is if a conductor is the founder of an orchestra. Now, these are made up categories by me. Not all conductors, and even the greatest ones, not all of them get to be founders of an orchestra. Not all conductors are necessarily guest conducting all the time. Not all conductors at all times have their own orchestra at their disposal. But I realize that separating it into these three categories will make us see with more clarity the different roles that are expected from a conductor at these different stages. So let's start with the simplest one, and that's the one of the guest conductor. When you're a guest conductor, all you have to worry about is the music. Okay, you're invited to conduct a concert and its corresponding rehearsals before the concert. What does that mean? That you have nothing to do with the organization in charge of the orchestra. You don't had no say on who are the musicians playing, on how they were selected, on what are the internal rules of the orchestra, how do they go about organizing the rehearsals. Nothing. You're invited, you probably agree on a fee, on a schedule, and you're there to arrive on day one of the rehearsal, and everything is ready, everything is set up for you. Usually when we talk about what conductors do, we're talking about this. What happens when conductor gets to the podium on day one of rehearsals. And this is also kind of what conductors or aspiring conductors study when they go to conservatory or to conducting school. This is what they are taught, how to lead themselves in front of an orchestra, how to lead a rehearsal, how to have baton technique, how to be clear with their tempi, how to be clear with their expression, and how to study the music and understand it well in order to be able to guide the musicians. So this is the part that is the simplest, I think, to understand, because yes, the conductor needs to arrive very well prepared. They must have learned the music very well. They don't need to play all the instruments. Most conductors play one or two instruments. Many conductors know how most or all of the instruments in the orchestra work, at least how they function, but that doesn't mean that they play them. Quite the opposite. When you go and stand in front of an orchestra, every single musician there is an expert at their instrument, probably better than you at it, unless you are a virtuoso, who's dedicated to also playing, I don't know, the violin or the horn or the cello, but most likely they know what they're doing. They had a very high level training, and not only that, they probably have been playing in orchestras for some time, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. And many times the repertoire that the conductor is put in charge of doing that particular week must have been played before by the orchestra. Maybe a few years ago, orchestras get to recycle repertoire, every few years. That's the nature of classical music. We're basically just doing covers of the same stuff over and over. Not always, but it's a lot. So if you're charged with conducting Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, then musicians know the symphony very well. Probably since they were kids, many of them decided to become musicians because they would listen to the recordings. And once they decided to go into music, somebody who decided to study the trumpet, classical trumpet, or classical oboe, or bassoon, they did so because they dreamt of playing in an orchestra. And there's not that much work for these musicians in order to make a sustainable, living as soloists or anything else. That the main job is to play in an orchestra. And then apart from that, they may have their own other projects like chamber music projects or teaching or sometimes playing as soloist, etc. But playing in the orchestra is a dream. So they know their craft. They know the recordings. They may know tons of recordings of the Beethoven symphonies, of the Brahms symphonies. They know who the musicians are in the most important orchestras in the world. So this is a lot of responsibility for a conductor, because you cannot arrive and teach them anything. Musicians hate nothing more than a conductor coming and trying to explain to them what the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony is about or what the Brahms Fourth Symphony is about. They know what it is about. So what is expected of the conductor? Well, like I said, in the example of Happy Birthday, the leader will have to make things easier for everyone to be together. So hopefully the conductor has also done their homework. They know what's a good tempo for this piece. They start and they make things easier for the orchestra. They give a vision of this piece that at least is coherent and it's persuasive enough so that the musicians will follow the conductor and, do their best while playing their favorite music. So the conductor needs to know how to lead a rehearsal. They need to know how to not waste time. They need to know when it is necessary to stop and fix things. They need to know when it may not be necessary to maybe repeat something. They can just say, okay, there was some details here and there. Are you guys aware of that? Yes, we're aware. Okay, it's gonna get fixed by tomorrow, right? Yes, it's gonna get fixed. Good. And so on and so forth. Does anyone have any questions? Sometimes the parts have mistakes. Not all parts for the musicians. Not all the music that they have in front of them is perfectly edited. Sometimes there are mistakes. Sometimes there's mistakes in the score. So the conductor should be able to answer all of those questions and make the job easier for everyone, so that at the end they have a wonderful performance. So by the time you get to the day of the concert, all the work must have been done in the rehearsals. And if the conductor did a good job during those rehearsals, probably the performance is going to go very well, because now the musicians just get to play freely what was rehearsed. And this is funnily enough, this is when the audience gets to see the final work. This is when they get to see the work of the conductor. But the reality is that the work already happened in the previous days of the week. So now the conductor can, I wouldn't say relax, but if they did a good job, they can just do their best to inspire the musicians, to lead them, full concentration, lead them coherently, but they are the ones who get to play. And yes, this is where the pictures are taken. This is where the videos are taken. This is when all of this, the cameras and the spotlight goes on the conductor. But it's, from my point of view, very important. And this is why I talk about the role of the guest conductor, because this is when usually conductors show the utmost respect for the musicians. And I think this is the key. Now, everything that I've talked about is expected from a conductor in all the other stages I talked about. If you are the artistic director or if you're the founder of an orchestra, when you get to rehearsal on day one, it's the same role. It's like you need to arrive prepared, guide the musicians the best you can, and hopefully have a wonderful performance because you had a wonderful week of rehearsals. So that's that when it comes to the music part. And that's why I use the example of the guest conductor. Nothing else is expected of you. What happens when you're the artistic director of an organization, of an orchestra? Well, first of all, a lot must have happened before for the conductor to be named artistic director. And when I say a lot, I mean like Game of Thrones kind of thing. It's being the artistic director, well, hopefully with no violence. But when it comes to be the artistic director of an orchestra, this is a highly, highly coveted job, a highly, highly coveted position. Why? Because just like for an instrumentalist, is key to have your own instrument, to finally, get to work on the instrument that's going to accompany you for years to come. Imagine the excitement of a violinist when they get a very good violin, or a pianist, So same thing for a conductor. They cannot just go and purchase an orchestra in the music store. Although this is a whole nother subject on whether a conductor can purchase or rent an orchestra. But generally, you can't. You need to be named the artistic director of an organization in order to have an orchestra with which you can work week after week and really bring your artistic vision to fruition and get to practice, throughout the seasons. So it's a highly coveted position. So a lot of maneuvering goes on before that. And I'm talking about political maneuvering, because most orchestras depend either on government, either city, state, or country, or federal, or on a board of directors, meaning the private sector. Or sometimes it's a combination of both. Either way, these people, either government or private sector, have a lot of say in who the conductor will be. And also, especially in the most established orchestras, the conductors have the musicians of the orchestra have a big say on who their conductor is going to be. So it's a combination of processes, and the conductor, the prospective conductor, needs to be very skillful at ingratiating themselves with the musicians, with the politicians, or with the board members in order to even be considered for this position. And then every orchestra has their different processes, but let's suppose you go through them successfully and you're named the artistic director of an orchestra. Besides all the other conductors being jealous of you, well, now you have a big organization at your helm. So it's basically like being named the CEO of a company. So now you're not only in charge of conducting week over week the concerts, just as if you were the guest conductor, but now you're in charge of how the organization works, behind the scenes. And this is where it gets interesting. Now, I use this example of the artistic director because it's very different than being the founder. If you're the artistic director and the orchestra is already functioning, you arrive and the musicians are already there. Somebody else in the past already did the process of auditions, of selecting musicians, so you are dealing with what you have. There's probably already rules in place, there's probably already a staff in place, personnel, a theater where you perform, maybe a rehearsal hall where you have your rehearsals, and there's instruments. You have all of these different assets that are now at your disposal, and most importantly, the budget of the orchestra is at your disposal. So where do you start? You have the musicians, and always this is the most important part. No matter what stage you are as a conductor, you will have no orchestra without musicians, and the orchestra exists because of the musicians. So you have to know who they are. These are people that you're going to be working with and dealing with week over week. So you better decide very quickly how you're going to get along with them. Are you going to keep a distance? Are you going to become friendly? Are you going to try to build personal relationships with each of them? Many times with many orchestras, since these are coveted jobs, people who play full time in an orchestra, who are in the payroll, probably upended their lives in order to come to this city and take this position. When an opening for an orchestra is announced, people audition from different parts of the country, from different parts of the world sometimes. So these people that you're dealing with are very serious about this job. So any decisions about, do we need to hire more musicians? Do we need to hire new musicians? Does anyone need help retiring? Need to be not taken lightly at all. And if this is a well-established orchestra, most likely they have a union or they have rules in place that protect the musicians. So it's very important for a conductor to think about this relationship and to always arrive definitely with the utmost respect for them, but also to think about what kind of result does the conductor want for the orchestra, what kind of quality. Do we need to raise the salaries if we want better musicians to come here, or if we want the current musicians to be able to drop some of their other obligations in order to dedicate more time to the orchestra, or to at least be fresh for the rehearsals, and so on. The other main thing that falls on the artistic director's shoulders is the programming. So once you're at the helm of an orchestra, what the orchestra plays week after week, season after season, usually is the responsibility of the conductor. Of course, the more established orchestras have maybe a committee within the musicians, and probably if there's a board, the board also has a say on what gets performed, or maybe some suggestions, or maybe some veto power, especially if it comes to budget. Sometimes the politicians also care, of what the orchestra performs, because this is the the people's money that is being used to fund this project. So the programs better be beneficial for the people. So the conductor needs to think of a lot of moving parts when it comes to deciding what to program. And of course, you need to take into account what has been played before. You don't want to repeat yourself, but you also want to make sure that this is where you put your imprint as an artist. Are you going to do mostly traditional repertoire? Are you going to be commissioning new pieces, even if maybe they're not as attractive for the box office, but they definitely are attractive when it comes to legacy or to giving a platform to new composers? Are you gonna maybe focus on women composers who deserve to be much better known, or minority composers? When it comes to soloists that you're gonna invite, are you gonna spend a lot of money inviting star soloists because they're gonna be a big box office hit and maybe they're a guaranteed quality when it comes to the outcome? Or are you gonna give a chance to young soloists who maybe deserve a platform and deserve to be heard or well known? So as you can see, a lot is riding on your decisions as a conductor, and all of it connects to the budget, because you may have a desire to play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, but if you have a general manager taking care of the budget and maybe they're not a musician, they will come to the conductor and be like, hey, why do we need the Beethoven Fifth Symphony when we can do the Fourth Symphony, and then you don't need to hire 3 trombones and a contrabassoon and a piccolo? And a conductor who is not very patient will probably go crazy at this question. You don't know the difference between Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and the Fourth Symphony. But a sensitive and patient conductor will have to explain why do we need to do a Fifth Symphony, and we need to hire those trombones and that piccolo and that contrabassoon, even if we have to pay them a little more and they only play in the last movement. So all of these decisions take into place. You cannot just say we're gonna do this or that. You have to look at, okay, do we need to rent the parts for this, meaning the sheet music? Is it copyrighted? Do we have the necessary musicians, or do we have to hire extra musicians? Are those extra musicians local, or do we need to fly them from somewhere else? And therefore, how is this going to affect our budget? And these decisions affect the whole organization, because at the end, there's things that are not visible, but naturally very important too. Probably the musicians, the first thing they did was come to the new artistic director and say, hey, our chairs are not very comfortable. Could we get new chairs? Or maybe our music stands are falling apart, or the percussion section is coming to say, hey, our instruments are like 30 years old and they're all beaten up, literally, so maybe we can get new ones, and so on and so forth. So all of these decisions that need to be taken affect the whole result of the orchestra. They not just affect the outward result, the musical result, but also the inner spirit, the inner vibe of the orchestra, the inner vibe of the staff, the inner vibe of the musicians. And this is important because the musicians need to enjoy this job. At the end, this is what they do this for. This is why they are doing what they love, and of course they have to do all these other activities in their lives in order to make ends meet. But coming to rehearsal and being able to perform the greatest repertoire, that repertoire that they dreamt about when they were kids, week over week, it's a big joy for them, unless the conductor doesn't understand that responsibility and doesn't create a good environment for them. So a lot of it rides on how the conductor deals with all of these things. Then, of course, we have the audience, the box office. Are you gonna keep charging what you're charging? Are you gonna raise prices? Are you gonna lower prices? How are you gonna reach new audiences? Do you try to do now maybe music of movie soundtracks? Are you gonna do video game music? Do the musicians like this? Do you need to persuade them? Do you need to do concerts maybe not in your regular venue in order to attract different audience than the one you usually bring? And lastly, what is your public relations strategy? Do you have a social media presence? And see, if a conductor, if the artistic director doesn't think of these things or doesn't take decisions on these things will happen anyway, just without their guidance. And usually that shows. So it's very obvious when an orchestra is not too careful about their social media presence or about how they present themselves to the audience, you know, what kind of experience they create for the concert goers. So all of this represents the vision of the conductor. Sure, a lot of things, maybe especially the more established organizations, a lot of things are already in place. And they're already in place and they're already working because a previous artistic director in tandem with the board or with the staff or with whoever, with the managers at that time, put all these processes and protocols in place. But somebody had to do it, and now as a conductor you need to take these processes, see how they fit with your artistic vision, and then carry them forward. So your legacy depends a lot on this vision and how you bring it about with your decisions, everyday decisions on all these big and small things. And you could have probably seen already that there's a big human aspect about this that has nothing to do with the music. It's about what's your relationship with the musicians, what's your relationship with the staff, with the personnel, with the board, with the politicians, with the audience, with the press, with the media. All of this is this very human aspect, and this is where the role of the conductor, you know, starts taking on bigger, higher dimension or wider dimension, I guess, than if you just stand at the podium and conduct. So what happens when you are the founder of an orchestra? And here I got to have a first-hand experience because the orchestra of which I'm the artistic director right now, which is La Súper in Monterrey, I am also the founder. And this is not my first rodeo, so to speak. I founded an orchestra 15 years ago, also in my hometown in Monterrey. It was a sort of similar project. Is the idea of bringing all these young, talented local musicians together to play together. And at that time, it was a fairly novel idea. And when I started in 2009, and I want to talk about these two orchestras that I founded, so to speak, because there was a big difference, and the big difference between both of them was the money behind them, or the lack thereof when it comes to the first one. The first one, all I wanted was to conduct, right? All I wanted was to have this experience to get started on this. And I am grateful to my friends at that time who helped me bring this dream come true, you know, come about. So it was a matter of doing a lot of work, personal work with the musicians, and being like, hey, there's this project, I want to put musicians together and do a concert. We have no money, are you willing to do this? And very quickly I learned that yes, musicians are in it for the music. You know, I had no money to offer them, and it's not that they were in it for me because I was a conductor, because I was not a conductor. I was just a pianist who wanted to conduct. So that was not what was calling their attention. Sure, maybe they had a good vibe from me, or some, you know, respect for what they do, but what excited them was to be in an orchestra and to make music. And in this case, you know, whatever repertoire I was proposing was attractive enough for them to be like, sure, let's do this. And very quickly I realized that all of these things that are already put together when you are a guest conductor, or even when you're named an artistic director of an orchestra, are not put together if you're starting from scratch. So first of all, yes, get together the musicians, and believe me, it's not the same thing to try to find violinists, because usually there's many of them, than to try to find an oboe or a bassoon player or a bass trombone. But then, where are you going to rehearse? Where are you going to fit all these people, and where are you going to find all the chairs, you know, where they're going to sit, or the stools for the percussionists or the bass players? Who's going to come and open that place? Who's going to turn on the light? Who's going to turn on the air conditioner? Who's going to put everything in place? All the music stands, all the chairs. Who decides how they get seated? What about the music, the sheet music? How do you find it? And where, when do you print it? And then how do you tape it all together? Because you need all this, the same set of sheet music for the violinists, depending on how many violinists you have, then you have to print so many copies, and so on and so forth. And you have ever seen how all the sheet music looks of the musicians? It's a big bunch. And from there you have to decide where do you want to perform and how are you going to get that space. And I was lucky at that time to have all this goodwill from different connections that I had made as a pianist, thanks to my career as a pianist. So I had a lot of goodwill. I got the space to rehearse for free. I got the space to perform for free. Fortunately, then the concert was free for the audience, and like that I was able to sustain, so to speak, this orchestra for a couple of years, with concerts, with a few concerts here and there. It was a short-lived project, but it taught me a lot on what goes behind forming an orchestra and how much you depend on the people, on how much you depend on everyone around this. And even though at the end it looks like you're at the center of the project, it's not true. This is deceiving. That what is at the center of the project is the music, and that's why everyone decides to be on it. But somebody has to organize it. Somebody has to put all of this together. And this is the case with conductors. Because we want to conduct, we seem to be the ones willing to put all this other work behind it, so that we can have an orchestra, so that we can have a rehearsal space, so that we can have a venue where we can perform and do what we love. So when I got to, more than 10 years later, present this project, of course it had matured much more in my head and in my heart, to the existing board of the Music Conservatory in Monterrey, the board of the Escuela Superior de Música, to start an orchestra, and this time to have the funds to start it. Then it's a whole different ballgame, and again you have to start thinking about different things. If you're going to pay your musicians, then how are you going to select them? What's going to be the audition process? And quickly you realize that you need to become an expert in logistics and an expert in drafting almost legal documents. If you want to explain, what's the audition process, and who is the jury, and how are musicians going to be qualified, and are these going to be blind auditions or not? And once a musician belongs to the orchestra, what does that even mean? What kind of rules do they have to abide for? What happens if they are late? What happens if they miss rehearsal? What happens if they move out of town? Things like that you need to clarify very quickly if you want to be taken seriously as an orchestra or as a conductor. Otherwise, you're just putting musicians together for a concert, for a gig, and this happens very often. A lot of concerts are just, let's put musicians together, call it an orchestra, and then the concert ends, call it a day. So in this case, if you have a long-term vision, you need to think about all these things. What is your brand? How are you going to present your brand to the audience? What's going to be the social media strategy? And very importantly, how are you going to get the money? And how are you going to manage it once you have it? And again, the conductor ends up being like the founder of a startup. Sure, they get all this help from all the team, and probably a lot of the people around you know much more than you, and you have to rely on them. Where are the instruments in the city? Where is the rehearsal space? What are the best schedules for the musicians? So on and so forth. But the buck stops at you when it comes to the decisions, and even a board could be like, okay, we don't know how to manage an orchestra. It's up to you. You get to decide how long are the rehearsals, how many rehearsals you need. And all people are going to see, and we're talking about musicians, board members, or politicians, or audience members, all they're going to see is the final result. And that final result is going to be the product of all these decisions that the conductor took, hopefully with a lot of care and consideration, not only for their own artistic vision, but also for all the parties involved. So I hope that this has given you a bit more of an idea of what conductors do and why sometimes it's such a mysterious role. And it's because 90 to 95% of the work happens behind the scenes, even before the first day of rehearsal. By the time you get to the podium on the first day of rehearsal, a lot of things must have happened for everything to be in place. And you can tell the success of an orchestra or an organization, or in my case, I feel like the success happens when at the end of the concert, all the parties involved say, well, this was all worth it. And with this, I want to finish because, yes, it is true that because of everything that I've talked to you about, conductors quickly realize that they do wield a lot of power. At the end, they decide which soloists to invite. These are jobs, right? And they have a lot of say on which musicians get to play in an orchestra. And if these are full-time orchestras or with a payroll, you're talking about persons' livelihoods. And these are people who have families. You know, when it comes to programming, you're talking about audiences. If you have a loyal audience who goes to your orchestra, they are depending on you and your ideas of programming to enjoy these concerts or not. So conductors do wield a lot of power, and this can get to their heads, so this can get to our heads, you know, and a lot of people get into it because of the ego, the idea that yes, you are at the front and it just feels great to feel the music and be at the center of all of it and have the spotlight and the emotion of the music. And all of this is true. And this is why I'm grateful, though, for my teacher. I was talking to you about him at the beginning, Enrique Dimeke. For when I asked him, you know, why did you decide to become a conductor? And he said something very beautiful, which was, I want to remind the musicians, including himself, why we do what we do. And I thought this was so important because at the end, all these parties involved in an orchestra are there for different reasons. When it comes to the musicians, yes, most likely they love the music and they may even believe in music as an agent for social change, you know, and as something that's inherently good for humanity. Or they may just be doing this for their own enjoyment because they have to sustain their families and all of that, or a combination of all of the above. And yes, maybe politicians see this as a thing of convenience, but that's totally fine. You know, it's a status, it's a culture, it's something that's for the people. You know, board members, same thing. It's a certain status to be able to support an orchestra and to be able to present your work, your philanthropic work, you know, in society. And this is a wonderful thing. The staff usually loves music. Sometimes you have former musicians working as a staff in the orchestra, you know, no longer doing music necessarily, but being there, being in the middle of it because they love it. And then you have audience members, and they are all there for different reasons, and that's what's beautiful about it. Some people just want to get transported, you know, some people just gonna get out of the everyday routine, and some people absolutely need this, maybe this particular day, as medicine for their souls. So if at the end of the concert they are all reminded of what they're there for and they think it was worth it, then I think the conductor will have done their job. So I want to say goodbye to you with the last movement, the fourth movement of the Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony, what we were listening to at the beginning. And this is going to be the final 2 or 3 minutes of the symphony, the finale, the spectacular finale. And this is the orchestra that I'm very proud of, the wonderful musicians of La Súper Philharmonic Orchestra in Monterrey, Mexico. It's myself conducting. It's a concert that took place in March. I hope you enjoy. My name is Abdiel Vázquez. This is Maestro in Tune. Until next time.